The dust from the Apache raid had barely settled when Thomas Brennan heard the voice, desperate, raw, cutting through the desert silence like a knife through canvas. "Please. Take me on your horse. I give you something no woman can give you." Thomas reined in his mare so hard she reared slightly, her hooves scraping against the rocky Arizona ground. He'd been riding away from the smoking remains of the Apache encampment for the better part of an hour, trying to put distance between himself and the massacre he'd just witnessed. The cavalry had swept through at dawn, Captain Morrison's orders, and Thomas, a civilian scout hired to track game trails, had watched in horror as soldiers fired indiscriminately into shelters where families slept. Now, turning in his saddle, Thomas saw her stumbling over the rocks toward him. An Apache woman, maybe 30 years old, her traditional dress torn and bloodied, her face streaked with tears and dust. But it wasn't her appearance that made Thomas's breath catch, it was what she carried in her arms. A child. A little girl, no more than 4 years old, unconscious or worse. "Please," the woman cried again in broken English, her voice cracking with desperation. "You take us. I give you something no woman can give." She struggled with the words, her accent thick, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Thomas's first instinct was to ride away. Hard. The cavalry would be sweeping the area for survivors, and anyone caught helping an Apache would face charges of treason, maybe worse. Captain Morrison had made it clear, no survivors meant no future raids, no future problems. It was brutal mathematics, the kind that turned men's souls to stone. But Thomas couldn't move. He sat frozen on his horse, staring at this woman who was offering him, what? His mind raced through possibilities, each more disturbing than the last, until the woman stumbled closer and he saw her eyes, not seductive, not cunning, but filled with a mother's pure, devastating terror. "My daughter," she gasped, holding up the child. She breathed, but sick. Very sick. "Bullet." She touched the child's side, and Thomas saw blood seeping through the small deerskin dress. "You take us to medicine man, to doctor. I give you." She paused, searching for words, then pressed her free hand to her chest. "I give you purpose. I give you redemption. Something no woman can give, not with body, but with truth." The words hit Thomas like a physical blow. Redemption. How did she know? How could this Apache woman, who should have seen him as her enemy, somehow recognize the guilt that had been eating him alive for months? Thomas had been in Arizona territory for 2 years, running from a past in Missouri that haunted his dreams. He'd been a teacher once, a good one, at a small schoolhouse outside Springfield. But one winter morning, he'd been drunk, something that had become increasingly common after his wife left him, and he'd failed to properly secure the schoolhouse stove. The building had caught fire while the children were inside. Most had escaped. Most, but not all. Little Sarah Jenkins, 8 years old, had died from smoke inhalation because Thomas had been sleeping off whiskey in the back room instead of monitoring the stove. He'd fled west before the trial, taking odd jobs, drinking himself numb, trying to outrun the memory of Sarah's mother screaming at the funeral. And now, here in the desert, another child was dying while he had the power to help. "The cavalry," Thomas said weakly. "They'll hunt you. They'll hunt anyone who helps you. Then we die," the woman said simply, her voice steady despite her tears. "But you die different. You die every day inside, yes. I see it. Your eyes are dead man's eyes. This," she lifted her daughter slightly, "this give you life again. This let you be man you supposed to be." Thomas felt his throat constrict. How dare she? How dare this stranger see into him so clearly? But even as anger flared, he knew she was right. He'd been dead inside since Missouri, going through motions, waiting for whiskey or a bullet to finish what guilt had started. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Desba," she replied. "Means, goes to war." But now. She looked down at her daughter, now I go to war for her life only. And the girl? Kua. Means eagle. Desba's voice broke. She should fly, not die in dirt like broken bird. Thomas looked back toward the direction he'd come from. He could see smoke still rising from the demolished camp. He thought about the soldiers, probably celebrating their victory with whiskey and stories of bravery. He thought about Captain Morrison's cold eyes and colder orders. Then he looked at Desba, at little Kua's pale face, at the blood slowly spreading across her dress. Sarah Jenkins had died because he'd been too drunk, too selfish, too broken to do his duty. But Kua was dying right now, and for once, maybe the only time that mattered, Thomas Brennan could choose differently. Get on, he said, extending his hand down to Desba. Quickly. Desba's eyes widened in disbelief, then filled with fresh tears, these ones of hope rather than despair. She grabbed his hand with surprising strength, and Thomas hauled her up behind him, helping her settle Kua between them. The child moaned softly, and Thomas felt the sound pierce his heart. There's a mission, Thomas said, kicking his horse into a gallop. San Xavier del Bac. The Spanish priests there, they help anyone. It's 2 days' ride south, but the father's no medicine. If we ride hard, if we're lucky. If God wills, Desba said softly, holding her daughter tight. If God wills, Thomas repeated, though he'd stopped believing in God somewhere between Missouri and Arizona. They rode through the afternoon heat, Thomas pushing his mare harder than he should have, knowing that every minute counted for Kua and that every mile increased their chances of evading cavalry patrols. Desba spoke little, focusing all her energy on keeping her daughter stable, whispering to her in Apache, prayers or lullabies, Thomas couldn't tell. As the sun began its descent, painting the desert in shades of orange and crimson, Thomas realized they had a problem. His mare was exhausted, and Kua's breathing had become shallow and irregular. They needed to stop, to let the horse rest and to try to stabilize the child, but stopping meant losing time they didn't have. There, Desba said suddenly, pointing to an outcropping of rocks that formed a natural shelter. We must stop. Must help Kua now or she die before we reach mission. Thomas wanted to argue, wanted to push on, but he knew she was right. They guided the mare to the shelter, and Thomas helped Desba down before dismounting himself. His legs nearly gave out, he'd been in the saddle for hours, but he forced himself to stay upright, to stay useful. Desba laid Kua gently on Thomas's bedroll, which he'd spread in the shade of the rocks. The bullet had entered the child's left side, just below her ribs, and while it didn't appear to have hit anything vital, the wound was infected and Kua had lost considerable blood. I need to clean it, Thomas said, reaching for his canteen and the small medical kit he kept in his saddlebag. It's going to hurt her. Do it, Desba said firmly. Pain better than death. Thomas worked carefully, using precious water to clean the wound while Desba held her daughter and sang softly in Apache. Kua cried out several times, and each cry felt like a nail in Thomas's heart. But he persevered, packing the wound with clean cloth torn from his spare shirt and binding it as tightly as he dared. She needs real medicine, Thomas said when he finished. Antibiotics, surgery maybe. I've done what I can, but... You do more than soldier who shoot her, Desba said quietly. You do more than men who destroy my home. You do good thing, Thomas. First good thing in long time, yes. Thomas nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. It was the first good thing, the first right thing, since Sarah Jenkins had died. And it felt like a crack of light breaking through years of darkness. Rest, he told Desba. We ride again at first light. The mission is still a day and a half away, but if we start early, if Kua holds on. She hold on, Desba said with fierce certainty. She is eagle. Eagles do not give up. As night fell over the desert, Thomas kept watch while Desba slept beside her daughter, one hand always touching Kua, monitoring her breathing. Thomas sat with his rifle across his knees, watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast Arizona sky. He thought about choices and consequences. Dawn broke red and violent across the Arizona sky, and Thomas knew immediately that something was wrong. His mare nickered nervously, ears pinned back, and the hair on the back of Thomas's neck stood up. He'd learned to trust those instincts during his time in the territory. They often meant the difference between life and death. "Desba," he whispered urgently, touching her shoulder. "Wake up. We need to move now." She came awake instantly, mother's instinct overriding exhaustion, her hand immediately going to check Kiwa's pulse. "She still breathed," Desba said softly, relief evident in her voice. "Fever less." "That's good, but we have company." Thomas pointed to the horizon where a thin line of dust was rising. "Riders. Could be cavalry, could be Apache scouts looking for survivors. Either way, we need to go." They broke camp in minutes, Thomas lifting Kiwa with surprising gentleness while Desba gathered their meager supplies. The little girl's eyes fluttered open briefly, and she whimpered something in Apache. Desba responded in their language, her voice soothing, and Kiwa relaxed slightly. "What did she say?" Thomas asked as he helped Desba mount the horse with Kiwa cradled between them. "She asked if you are good white man or bad white man," Desba replied. "I tell her you are good man who lost his way, but now he find it again." Thomas didn't respond, couldn't respond. He just urged the mare forward, heading south toward the mission that now seemed impossibly far away. Behind them, the dust plume grew larger. Whoever was following was gaining ground. By mid-morning, Thomas could make out details. 6 riders, cavalry uniforms, led by a figure he recognized even at a distance, Captain Morrison, sitting tall in his saddle, his brass buttons catching the sunlight. Thomas's stomach dropped. Morrison was relentless and cruel, a man who saw the Apache not as human beings but as obstacles to be eliminated. "They're going to catch us," Thomas said grimly. "The mare can't outrun fresh cavalry horses, not carrying 3 people." "Then you leave us," Desba said immediately. "You go. Save yourself." "No." The word came out harder than Thomas intended. "I didn't save you from one death to hand you over to another." "Then what we do?" Thomas scanned the landscape desperately. They were in open desert now, nowhere to hide, no defensive position to take. In an hour, maybe less, the cavalry would overtake them. And when they did, then Thomas saw it. A mile ahead, a small depression in the earth marked the location of one of the old Spanish wells that dotted this part of the territory. Not all of them still had water, but all of them had something else, a stone circular wall, built centuries ago, just tall enough for cover. "Hold on," Thomas said, urging his exhausted mare into one final gallop. They reached the well with minutes to spare. Thomas helped Desba and Kiwa down into the well's interior. It was dry, thankfully, but deep enough to provide protection, and positioned his horse between them and the approaching cavalry. Then he stood, rifle in hand, and waited. Captain Morrison and his men thundered up in a cloud of dust, forming a semicircle around the well. Morrison was a tall man with a neatly trimmed beard and eyes like chips of blue ice. He looked at Thomas with an expression of utter contempt. "Brennan," Morrison said, his voice dripping with disdain. "I should have known. Scout goes missing after a raid, and here you are, playing Indian lover." "She's wounded, Captain," Thomas called out, keeping his rifle lowered but ready. "Her child is dying. I'm taking them to the mission at San Xavier del Bac." "You're harboring hostiles," Morrison replied coldly. "That's treason. Now step aside and let us finish our work." "She's not a hostile. She's a mother with a wounded child." Morrison laughed, a sound without humor. "They're all hostiles, Brennan. Every man, woman, and child. Today's crying baby is tomorrow's warrior. You know the orders, no survivors." Something inside Thomas crystallized in that moment. He thought about Sarah Jenkins, about the child he'd failed to save. He thought about Kiwa, fighting for life in the well behind him. He thought about all the times in his life he'd chosen the easy path, the safe path, the path that let him avoid hard truths about himself and the world. "No," Thomas said quietly, raising his rifle. "Not this time." Morrison's eyes widened slightly. "You're pointing a gun at United States cavalry, Brennan. That's not just treason, that's suicide." "Maybe," Thomas agreed. "But I've been dead for 2 years anyway. Might as well make it mean something." The standoff held for a long moment, 6 armed soldiers against 1 guilt-ridden former teacher. Thomas knew the mathematics, he couldn't win. But he also knew something Morrison didn't understand: some things mattered more than survival. Then Desba's voice rose from the well, strong and clear, singing in Apache. It was a death song, Thomas realized, preparing her soul and her daughter's soul for what was coming. The sound was beautiful and terrible, a mother's love transformed into melody. And something shifted in the faces of Morrison's men. One soldier, barely 20 years old with scared eyes, lowered his rifle slightly. Another looked away, unable to meet Thomas's gaze. They were just boys, Thomas realized, boys who'd been told they were fighting monsters but were now facing a woman singing to her dying child. "Captain," the young soldier said hesitantly. Maybe we could let them go. Just this once. Nobody has to know." Silence. Morrison barked. But Thomas heard the uncertainty in his voice. The captain's absolute control was cracking. "She offered me something," Thomas said, speaking not just to Morrison but to all the soldiers. "She said she'd give me something no woman could give me. You know what I thought she meant? Same thing you're all thinking, probably. But I was wrong." He paused, making eye contact with each man. "She offered me redemption. She offered me a chance to be better than what I've been. To save a life instead of taking one, to show mercy instead of cruelty. And I'm asking you, all of you, to accept that same gift." Morrison's face had gone rigid with rage. "Men, prepare to." "No, sir." The young soldier who'd spoken before stepped his horse forward, placing himself between his captain and Thomas. "I won't shoot a man protecting a child. My mama raised me better than that." "Nor will I," another soldier said, moving forward. Then another. And another. Until 4 of Morrison's 6 men had positioned themselves in a line, refusing the order. The captain sat alone, isolated by his own cruelty, his face purple with fury. "You're all finished." Morrison screamed. "Court-martialed. Dishonorably discharged." "Maybe," the young soldier said. "But we'll sleep at night." Morrison stared at his mutinous command for a long moment, then at Thomas, then at the well where Desba's song had faded into silence. Something flickered across his face, perhaps a memory of his own humanity, long buried beneath years of warfare and hate. For a second, Thomas thought the captain might draw his pistol and start shooting. Instead, Morrison spat in the dust, jerked his horse around, and rode away alone, his back rigid with humiliated rage. The young soldier who'd led the mutiny dismounted and approached Thomas carefully. "Name's Private Charlie Whitmore, sir. From Ohio originally." He glanced toward the well. "How bad is the little girl?" "Bad," Thomas admitted. "Bullet wound, infected. I'm trying to get her to the mission, but I don't know if she'll make it." Charlie turned to his companions. "Boys, we've got 2 horses fresh enough to carry them. Brennan's mare is spent." He looked back at Thomas. "You take our mounts, ride hard for San Xavier del Bac. We'll take your mare and head back slow, tell Morrison they got away from us in the desert. Give you a head start." Thomas felt his eyes burn with tears. "Why?" he asked. "Why risk everything for strangers?" Charlie smiled sadly. "Because I got a little sister back home, about that Apache girl's age. And I joined the army to protect children, not kill them. Seems like somewhere along the way, we all forgot that." He extended his hand. Go on now. Save that little eagle. Thomas shook Charlie's